I'm Susan, 52, female. I live in a quiet city apartment filled with books and artifacts from my travels, a peaceful sanctuary I've built for myself over the years. I'm the chief curator at the city's main historical museum, a job that is less a profession and more a lifelong passion. My life was calm, ordered, and precisely how I liked it, until an embossed cream colored envelope arrived and threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about my own family. It was an invitation to my only daughter's wedding, but it felt more like a summons to my own public humiliation. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The invitation was a work of art, thick cardstock, gold foil lettering, and a delicate satin ribbon holding it all together. It screamed expensive, which was no surprise. My ex-husband, David, was footing the entire bill for our daughter Chloe's wedding. Since our divorce 15 years ago, David had made a point of using his ever-growing fortune to create a stark contrast between his life and mine. He was the successful investment banker with a sprawling mansion and a new, younger wife, Karen. I was the quiet museum curator with a modest salary and a deep love for history. I ran my thumb over Chloe's name, intertwined with that of her fiancé, James. James was a good man, a kind and steady architect who seemed to genuinely love my daughter. I was happy for her, truly, but my happiness was clouded by a familiar anxiety. Dealing with David and Karen was always a tightrope walk. They had a way of making me feel like an inconvenient relic from a past they'd rather forget. A week after the invitation arrived, Chloe called. Her voice was bright but held an undercurrent of tension I knew all too well. "Mom, did you get the invite?" she asked, a little too quickly. "I did, sweetheart. It's beautiful," I said, keeping my tone light. "I'm already trying to decide what to wear." There was a pause about that. She started, and my stomach tightened. "Karen is handling the aesthetic of the wedding party. She has a very specific color palette in mind for the immediate family." I knew what was coming. "And what color is that, Chloe?" "It's a specific shade of silver," she said, her voice dropping. "Karen and Dad are insisting everyone in the main family photos coordinate. She said she'd find a dress for you to make it easier. The phrase was a classic Karen manipulation, a sugar-coated way of saying, "You're not trusted to dress yourself appropriately for our event." I managed a small, "Okay, honey, whatever makes your day less stressful," but we both knew it wasn't about her stress. It was about control. It was David and Karen's way of marking their territory. They were the hosts, the benefactors, the main characters. I was just the biological mother, a footnote in my own daughter's wedding story. The dress arrived by courier a few weeks later. It was a plain, ill-fitting silver sheath that looked more like a uniform than a celebratory gown. It was frumpy, aged me by a decade, and was clearly a low-budget afterthought. There was no note, just the dress in a box. It was a silent message, and it was loud and clear. "You are not one of us. You are an obligation." I folded the dress and put it back in the box. I knew I wouldn't be wearing it. Instead, I opened my closet and pulled out a classic, elegant navy blue gown I had worn to a museum gala a year prior. It was understated, professional, and it was me. If I was going to be sidelined, I was going to do it with my dignity intact. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with small, calculated slights. My name was listed on the wedding website simply as Susan, while David and Karen were Mr. David and Mrs. Karen Miller, parents of the bride. I was not invited to the rehearsal dinner, with Chloe explaining it was a small affair for just the wedding party and the hosts. The hosts, not the parents. Every detail felt like a tiny cut, designed to remind me of my place. My ex-husband had bought my daughter's loyalty, and the price was my exclusion. I told myself it didn't matter, that all that mattered was Chloe's happiness. But as the day drew closer, I felt a growing sense of dread. I wasn't just an invited guest. I was being set up as a prop in their perfect family portrait, and I was about to be pushed out of the frame. The day of the wedding arrived, a crisp, sunny autumn afternoon. The venue was a lavish country club, the kind with sprawling green lawns and valet parking. As I pulled up, I could see David standing near the entrance, greeting guests like a king welcoming subjects to his court. Karen was by his side, dripping in diamonds, her smile as wide and artificial as the silk flowers on the archway. I took a deep breath, straightened my navy blue dress, and prepared for battle. I walked in alone. Chloe was already sequestered away with her bridesmaids. I scanned the bustling foyer for a familiar face, but saw none. David's entire side of the family, people I had known for years, averted their eyes or offered a curt, tight-lipped nod. It was clear the memo had gone out. Susan is an outsider. When David finally saw me, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He walked over, his stride full of purpose. "Susan," he said, his voice low. "That's not the dress Karen sent. It's not." I replied calmly. "It didn't fit properly. I hope this is acceptable." His eyes narrowed. "It would have been better if you had coordinated," he hissed, before turning on his heel to greet a wealthy-looking couple. Karen didn't even acknowledge my existence. The ceremony was beautiful, set in a garden overlooking a serene lake. I watched my daughter, my beautiful, brilliant Chloe, say her vows to James. I felt a surge of love and pride that momentarily washed away the bitterness. I caught her eye as she walked back down the aisle, and she gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. That smile told me everything. She knew this was wrong, but she was caught in the middle, too swept up in the whirlwind of her perfect day to fight for me. The real humiliation, however, was reserved for the reception. The ballroom was stunning, decorated with towering floral arrangements and crystal chandeliers. A large seating chart on an ornate easel stood near the entrance. I searched for my name. The main table, a long, banquet-style affair at the front of the room, listed David Miller, Karen Miller, James's parents, and the entire wedding party. My name was nowhere to be found. I scanned the chart again, my heart pounding. Finally, I found it, table 19. I looked around the room, locating the small, numbered placards on each table. Table 1, 2, 3. They were all near the front. I kept looking, my eyes traveling further and further toward the back of the enormous ballroom. And there it was, table 19. It was the last table, tucked away in a dim corner right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen and a massive speaker that was already humming in anticipation of the band. My tablemates were a collection of distant cousins of the groom whom he'd barely met, and a few of the venue's junior coordinators who were taking a break. They were all polite, but it was obvious this was the table for miscellaneous, unimportant guests. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was not family. I was not the mother of the bride. I was an afterthought, seated with the staff. I sat down, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. The swinging kitchen doors provided a constant source of noise and traffic. A waiter nearly knocked my chair over as he rushed out with a tray of appetizers. The booming bass from the speaker next to me made the water in my glass ripple. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, guests whispering to each other, likely wondering why the mother of the bride was seated in Siberia. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. David and Karen had orchestrated this perfectly. They had not just excluded me, they had put my exclusion on public display. I sat there, invisible in plain sight, a ghost at my own daughter's wedding feast. It was in that moment, listening to the clatter of plates from the kitchen, that I realized I had underestimated their cruelty. This wasn't just about control, it was a punishment. I spent the first hour of the reception in a state of quiet shock, nursing a glass of water and making polite, meaningless conversation with the groom's third cousin. I watched the main table from my distant outpost. I saw David give a grand, sweeping speech about family and legacy, never once mentioning my name or my role in Chloe's life. I saw Karen dabbing a fake tear from her eye as she toasted the happy couple, calling Chloe the daughter she always dreamed of. Every word was a twist of the knife. My daughter, Chloe, occasionally glanced my way. I could see the conflict on her face, a flicker of guilt mixed with the overwhelming pressure to be the happy bride, but she never got up. She never walked over to my table. She was trapped in the golden cage her father had built for her, and for today, she had chosen to stay inside it. I decided I needed some air. Excusing myself from the table of strangers, I slipped out onto a side terrace overlooking the golf course. The cool night air was a relief. I leaned against the stone balustrade, closing my eyes and just breathing. I wasn't going to cry. I had shed enough tears over David's cruelty years ago. This was different. This was a cold, hard realization that the chasm between my daughter and me was far wider than I had ever imagined. "It's a beautiful evening, isn't it?" The voice startled me. I turned to see an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a classic tuxedo, standing a few feet away. He had kind eyes and a warm, genuine smile. I recognized him from the ceremony. He had been seated near the front. "Yes, it is," I said, offering a weak smile in return. "I hope you don't mind me saying." He continued, taking a step closer, "But it seems a crime for the mother of the bride to be hiding out on the terrace alone." His words were direct but not unkind. I felt my composure waver. I just needed a moment. I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. He looked at me intently, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. You look incredibly familiar to me, he said, tilting his head slightly. Have we met before, perhaps at a charity event? I shook my head. I don't think so. I tend to lead a fairly quiet life. Forgive me for being so forward, but I have a knack for remembering faces, especially from the arts and philanthropy circles, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. He gestured back toward the ballroom. I'm a guest of the groom's family, Arthur Peterson. The name clicked in my mind. Mr. Peterson, the Arthur Peterson. He was a legendary philanthropist and art collector. His family's foundation was one of the largest benefactors to cultural institutions in the entire country. My museum had spent the better part of a decade trying to get a meeting with his foundation's board. He was a titan in my world, a man whose support could transform an institution. He was still looking at me, the pieces falling into place in his mind. Wait a minute, he said slowly, his eyes widening. You're not Susan Miller anymore, are you? You're Susan Gable, the curator from the City Historical Museum. You wrote that incredible monograph on pre-colonial pottery, the one that won the National Heritage Award. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. He not only knew who I was professionally, but he remembered a specific academic paper I had written 5 years ago. Yes, I finally managed to say, that's me, Mr. Peterson's warm smile turned into a wide, enthusiastic grin. I knew it, my goodness. I've been following your work for years. Your restoration of the colonial wing was nothing short of genius. My foundation has been looking for a new legacy project, something with real historical significance. He paused, his expression shifting from excitement to confusion. He glanced back toward the main table where David and Karen were holding court, then back at me, standing alone in the shadows. Forgive me, he said, his voice now lower, more serious. But why on earth is a celebrated academic like you being seated next to the kitchen? Mr. Peterson's question hung in the air, simple and direct. For the first time all night, I felt seen. Not as David's discarded ex-wife or Chloe's forgotten mother, but as Susan Gable, a professional with a respected identity of her own. It was like a dam breaking inside me. The carefully constructed walls of composure I had maintained all evening crumbled. That, I said, my voice thick with emotion, is a very good question, Mr. Peterson. He guided me to a quiet bench on the far end of the terrace, away from the noise of the reception. Please, call me Arthur, he insisted gently. And please, tell me what's going on. I have a feeling this isn't just a simple seating chart error. And so I told him. I told him everything. I spoke about the 15 years of subtle and not so subtle humiliations from David and his new wife, Karen. I explained how they used money as a weapon, creating a world for Chloe so dazzling that my own quiet, academic life could never compete. I told him about the dress, the exclusion from the rehearsal dinner, my name being minimized on the wedding website, and the final crushing blow of being seated at table 19. I wasn't whining or seeking pity. I was simply stating the facts, my voice steady and clear. It felt less like a complaint and more like a testimony. Arthur listened patiently, his expression growing more grim with every detail. He was a man who understood power, wealth, and influence, and he immediately recognized the cruel dynamics at play. So your ex-husband is David Miller of Miller Capital Investments, Arthur said, more a statement than a question. I've heard the name. He's known for being aggressive in his dealings. That's one word for it. I replied with a wry twist of my lips. And he and his new wife have gone to great lengths to erase you. He mused, looking back at the brightly lit ballroom. They want to present themselves as the sole architects of your daughter's success and happiness. By seating you in the back, they make you invisible. They control the narrative. They've been controlling it for years, I admitted. David has always told Chloe that my focus on my dusty old museum was why our family fell apart. He convinced her that my career was a selfish choice, that I cared more about history than about her. He painted me as boring, irrelevant, and poor, and I suppose, compared to his private jets and lavish vacations, I am. Arthur shook his head, a flash of anger in his eyes. Susan, your work isn't just a job. It's a contribution to our city's culture and legacy. What you do preserves our collective memory. It has more value than any stock portfolio. David doesn't denigrate your work because he thinks it's unimportant. He does it because he's threatened by it. He can buy anything he wants, but he can't buy the kind of respect you've earned. His words were a balm on a wound I hadn't realized was so deep. For years, I had internalized David's narrative. I had started to believe that my life was small, that my passion was insignificant. Arthur was holding up a mirror, showing me a reflection I had forgotten existed. "Tell me about the museum's current situation," Arthur said, his tone shifting from personal to professional. "I've heard rumors that you've been struggling with funding for the new expansion wing." "Struggling is an understatement," I sighed. "The city cut our budget again. We've been trying to launch a private capital campaign for the Founders of the City exhibit, but we haven't found a lead donor. We need a major gift to get the project off the ground, someone to lend their name and influence to the cause." Arthur's eyes lit up with a brilliant idea. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face. "I believe," he said, tapping his fingers on the bench, "that we have an opportunity here to rectify a number of injustices at once. David and his wife want to be the center of attention. They want their names associated with power and legacy." He leaned in, his voice conspiratorial. "Well, let's give them a chance to be part of a real legacy. A legacy they could never build on their own." Arthur and I spent the next 20 minutes outlining a plan. It was audacious, simple, and utterly perfect. It preyed on David's biggest weaknesses, his ego and his desperate need for social validation among the city's elite. Arthur was not just a wealthy man, he was a gatekeeper to the upper echelons of society that David and Karen were so desperate to conquer. We walked back into the reception hall together, and the atmosphere shifted. People who had ignored me all night suddenly took notice. Whispers followed us as Arthur, a man everyone in that room either knew or wanted to know, guided me not to my forgotten table in the back, but toward the dance floor. The band was playing a slow song. The DJ, who was also the MC for the evening, was preparing to make some announcements. Arthur flagged him down. "Excuse me," Arthur said, his voice calm but commanding. "I'd like to make a special announcement, if I may. A wedding gift for the happy couple." The MC, seeing who he was talking to, immediately agreed. "Of course, Mr. Peterson." "Ladies and gentlemen, a special word from the esteemed Mr. Arthur Peterson." A hush fell over the crowd, all eyes turned to us. I could see David and Karen at the main table, their expressions a mixture of confusion and excitement. They clearly thought Arthur, their most prestigious guest, was about to sing their praises. Karen was already preening, adjusting her diamond necklace. Arthur took the microphone. I stood just behind him, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my face was a mask of serene confidence. "Good evening, everyone," Arthur began, his voice resonating through the ballroom. "It is a joy to be here to celebrate the union of two wonderful young people, Chloe and James. I've known the groom's family for years, and it's a pleasure to get to know the bride's family tonight." He paused and turned his gaze directly toward me. He smiled warmly. "I was just having a wonderful conversation with the mother of the bride, Susan Gable." He used my professional name. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw David's face tighten. Karen's smile became fixed and brittle. "Some of you may not know this," Arthur continued, his voice full of admiration, "but we have a local hero in our midst. Susan is the brilliant chief curator at our city historical museum. Her award-winning work has been instrumental in preserving the heritage of our great city for future generations." More murmurs. People were now looking at me with newfound respect and curiosity. I stood a little taller. Susan and I were discussing the museum's vital new expansion project. "Founders of the City Wing," Arthur announced, "a project that will honor the very legacy of the families who built this community. Families like many of yours." He scanned the room, making eye contact with several prominent city figures. "In honor of Chloe and James, and to celebrate a family so deeply invested in our city's future," Arthur declared, his voice booming, "the Peterson Foundation would like to kick off fundraising with a lead donation of $1 million. The room erupted in gasps, followed by a wave of applause. This was a monumental donation, the kind that makes headlines, but Arthur wasn't finished. He held up a hand for silence, however, he said, turning his attention to the main table. "My donation is a matching grant. It comes with a challenge." He looked directly at David. "I would like to personally invite the bride's father, Mr. David Miller, to match this donation and join us as a co-chair of this historic campaign." A chance to put the Miller family name on a true city landmark. The silence in the room was absolute. Every single eye was locked on David. He was trapped. Arthur had just publicly challenged him in front of all his friends, business associates, and social rivals. To refuse would be a public declaration of being either too poor or too uncharitable to accept. It would be a social death sentence. To accept would mean writing a 7-figure check, and more painfully for him, sharing the spotlight with me. David's face went pale. Karen looked like she had swallowed a wasp. He was cornered. And he knew it. The plan was working better than I could have ever imagined. David was frozen for what felt like an eternity. The smile was gone, replaced by the cold, hard mask of a financier calculating profits and losses. He was weighing the cost of $1 million against the cost of public humiliation. His ego, as Arthur predicted, won out. Slowly, a strained smile crept back onto his face. He stood up, grabbing a microphone from the nearby podium. "Arthur," he said, his voice slick with false enthusiasm, "you honor my family. Of course, we accept this wonderful challenge. Nothing is more important to us than this city's legacy." He raised his glass to family, to legacy, and to the new founder's wing. The room burst into applause again, this time even louder. People were cheering for his generosity, completely unaware of the checkmate they had just witnessed. David sat down, his face a thundercloud. Karen was staring daggers at me across the room, her carefully constructed evening in ruins. The MC, sensing the momentous occasion, turned to me. "Ms. Gable, would you like to say a few words?" This was my moment. Arthur gave me an encouraging nod. I walked to the podium, my steps steady and sure. I looked out at the sea of faces, stopping at my daughters. Chloe was watching me, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding. For the first time, she was seeing me not as her boring mom, but as the woman Arthur Peterson had just described, a respected, accomplished professional. "Thank you, Arthur," I began, my voice clear and strong, without a trace of the nervousness I felt inside. "Your generosity is astounding and will change the future of our museum." "And thank you, David," I said, turning to my ex-husband with a polite, cool smile. "I look forward to our new partnership. It's wonderful to know that after all these years you've finally developed an appreciation for history." A few chuckles rippled through the guests who understood the subtle dig. David's jaw clenched. "But tonight is about my daughter," I continued, my gaze softening as I looked at Chloe. "Chloe, from the moment you were born, you were my entire world. I may not have given you a life of private jets or designer clothes, but I gave you everything I had. I taught you to love books, to be curious about the world, and to understand that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, but by their character and their contributions. I raised my glass. I have always been proud of you. And tonight, I am prouder than ever, because I know you have married a good man. But my greatest hope for you, my darling daughter, is that you build a life based on genuine love and mutual respect. A life where no one is made to feel small or invisible or seated at the back of the room." My eyes met Karen's for a brief, searing moment before I turned back to the crowd. "So let us all toast to Chloe and James. May your life together be filled with truth, kindness, and the knowledge of who truly loves you. Cheers." I raised my glass, and the entire room, save for 3 people at the main table, rose to their feet and echoed, "Cheers." As I walked back from the podium, a path cleared for me. People who had ignored me hours before were now patting my shoulder, congratulating me, and telling me how much they admired my work. I was no longer the awkward ex-wife in the corner. I was Susan Gable, co-chair of the city's most important new cultural project. I had not only reclaimed my dignity, I had redefined my identity in front of everyone who had ever dismissed me. The final, perfect touch came as I passed the main table. David wouldn't look at me, but I heard Karen mutter under her breath to him, "You have to get out of this. You can't give her $1 million. And I heard David's clipped, furious reply. "It's too late," he announced it. I'm trapped. The rest of the wedding passed in a blur of congratulations and introductions. Influential people, who hours before had seen me as a nobody, were now slipping me their business cards, eager to be involved with the new museum wing. Arthur stayed by my side, acting as both a champion and a shield, ensuring that David and Karen couldn't approach me. My ex-husband and his wife left early. They didn't say goodbye. Their grand finale, the perfect wedding they had spent a fortune on, had been upstaged. The talk of the night was no longer the bride's dress or the extravagant flowers. It was the stunning philanthropic challenge and the sudden, dramatic emergence of the bride's other parent. The most important conversation, however, happened near the end of the night. As the crowd thinned, Chloe approached me, her eyes red-rimmed. James was with her, his hand resting supportively on her back. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I am so sorry." I looked at my daughter, not with anger, but with a profound sense of sadness for the position she'd been put in. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Chloe," I said gently. "You were trying to keep the peace on wedding day." "No," she insisted, shaking her head as tears streamed down her face. "I let them do that to you. I let Dad and Karen treat you like that. I knew it was wrong, the table, the dress, all of it. I was a coward. I was so caught up in the fantasy of it all, I forgot what really matters. James spoke up. Susan, he said, his voice full of sincerity, what you did tonight was incredible. I'm proud to have you as my mother-in-law. That was when my own tears finally came. I pulled Chloe into a hug, holding her tight. It's okay. I whispered, it's okay. We're okay. It wasn't a magic fix. The years of David's influence wouldn't be erased in one night, but it was a start. It was a bridge being built across a canyon that had been carved by money and lies. For the first time, Chloe saw the strength in my world and the ugly, manipulative nature of her father's. In the months that followed, things changed. David, true to his word and trapped by his public commitment, signed the check for $1 million. He and I co-chaired the fundraising committee in the most awkward and frigid meetings imaginable. But with Arthur's backing, the campaign was a spectacular success. We broke ground on the new wing within a year. My career, which David had long ridiculed, flourished. I was offered a position on the National Endowment for the Arts Advisory Board. My relationship with Chloe slowly began to heal. She and James started visiting me at my apartment for quiet dinners, far from the opulent world of her father. She started asking questions about my work, showing a genuine interest in the history I loved so much. She told me she and Karen had a massive falling out after the wedding, and that she was seeing her father's gifts for what they were, transactions. I never set out for revenge. All I ever wanted was respect. But that night, I learned that sometimes the best way to reclaim your story is to tell it, not with anger, but with quiet, unshakable dignity. David and Karen had tried to make me an invisible woman, a forgotten chapter in my daughter's life, but in their attempt to push me into the shadows, they inadvertently pushed me into the spotlight, allowing me to become the author of my own, much more interesting, next chapter.